Okay, great. Well, let's get going then. All right, so today's webinar is Hacking Unpacked. We're going to be talking about this year's most interesting breaches mapped to real controls. Real quick, I'm going to introduce our company and our team. So we are Go Security Pro. We are an Oklahoma-based cybersecurity firm specializing in risk assessments, penetration testing, vulnerability management, and virtual CISO services. And our team is here on the screen. A little bit about myself. I've been in cybersecurity for over 20 years. I've been a consultant for about 13 years now. Started this company 7 years ago, and I've had a lot of roles in cybersecurity in a variety of organizations. But I've been the bulk of my career has been with consulting with a wide array of organizations and with various compliance drivers and obviously between public organizations, private, nonprofit, all of that. And so anyway, that's a little bit about me. And when we think about the biggest breaches, I want to first talk about kind of where we are in the state of cybersecurity especially over the past year. Like what do we know, at the end of 2025? How did 2025 round out in terms of breaches? Well, if we look at the Identity Theft Resource Center, they put out some good data on U.S. breaches, the number of reported data breaches. Now, this does not include all data breaches. First off, it's only the U.S. And second off, a lot of breaches aren't reported. So these are the reported ones that they index, and they saw, just a little bit of uptick in 2025, with the 3,332 breaches. If you look at the number of notices that went out, like victim notices, 2024 was a huge, there were 5 mega breaches in that year. So that was kind of an outlier. But these numbers are in billions. So, we were at about 280 million notices that went out to victims in the US. So it didn't like shatter the records or anything, but it's still pretty steady with kind of obviously 2024 was an outlier there. So we're not seeing a vast increase in the number of breaches or the notices going out. We are seeing changes, what I call it, changes in transparency. And that's, what we know as the public about data breaches. And interestingly, the Identity Theft Resource Center looks at this and shows that, in 2020, nearly every company that sent out a breach notice provided some detail about the attack vector of like, okay, here's kind of what happened in the breach. Now, this last year, only about 30% of the organizations that sent out notices would do that. So just in the breach notice itself, the transparency's gone down. But has on the other end been kind of an increase in transparency in some degrees. For instance, state of Oklahoma officially became the 20th state to enact a modern data privacy law. So this is in March of this year. Governor Stitt signed the Oklahoma Consumer Data Privacy Act into law. And what that does is it actually takes effect January 1st of next year of 2027. So it establishes consumer data privacy rights, business obligations, and then Oklahoma, previous to that, actually amended its Cybersecurity Breach Notification Act, which took effect January of this year. Taken together, those bring Oklahoma into the modern kind of data protection era. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but if you're interested in more of the details, we have a good blog post on our website that talks about this specifically. But there is, in the Breach Notification Act, there is more demand for transparency and for submitting breach notifications to the Attorney General. That office becomes the enforcer of those new laws. State of Maine is really interesting. So their Attorney General group routinely posts data breach reports that it receives. So if you're an organization, you have a breach and it affects Maine residents, you have to go and report it to their Attorney General's office. There's a web form where this happens, and by policy choice of the state of Maine, they publish those. So it's not a statutory requirement, but the current practice is if a notification comes in, a notice comes into the AG's office and it doesn't present a harm to publish it to the public, they will go ahead and publish that. And so a lot of researchers look at State of Maine's data that they publish and to find, okay, what are the new trends? What are the latest breaches that maybe haven't hit the news cycle yet? And then the SEC disclosure rule in July of 2023, if you're an organization that's regulated by the SEC and has to do SEC filings, then you have to disclose on an annual basis material information regarding your cybersecurity risk management practices, strategy, governance, and also disclosures of security incidents and breaches. So going through the SEC cybersecurity filings can actually give us a lot of information about breaches. So in this talk, given that we don't have great transparency into all breaches, I picked four, really three breaches and one threat actor where we have good information. There are some good lessons learned, that there's developments around that I think are useful for IT groups and the public. Okay, so let's talk about the Stryker breach. So Stryker is a Fortune 500 medical tech company. They have global operations, complex supply chain, broad endpoint footprint across regions, and they had global business sales of 22.6 billion in 2024. So they're big. This was not ransomware. This was not custom malware. This was just one compromised admin identity used as an Intune kill switch. So let's get into the details. So in March of this year, the Hendala hacktivist group, they're an Iranian group. They're linked with the Iranian military. And they, obviously there's geopolitical retaliation happening and things like that. Well, they gained privileged access to Stryker's Microsoft tenant. While the initial access vector hasn't been publicly confirmed, there have been threat research firms that have come out and said, hey, by the way, we've seen, admin accounts for Stryker being floated around on info stealer leak websites, and is going as far back as mid 2024. So possibly it was compromised credentials. Whatever the case was, whatever the cause was, hackers gained access to the global admin of that tenant. And they didn't act like typical ransomware actors. What they did is they issued mass remote wipe or factory reset commands via Intune. So this, highlighted command here to wipe a device, they basically issued that for as many devices as they could. And this is kind of interesting because you think about Intune, it's a force multiplier. If a bad actor can get in control of Intune or Jamf, if you're like a Mac, Linux environment, or Workspace ONE, or these other attractive targets, these are becoming attractive targets because you can, as a bad actor, you can impact a lot of devices very quickly. So they ended up wiping 80,000 to 200,000 corporate owned and BYOD devices enrolled in Intune. Think about that. If you're an employee and you had a BYOD device, your personal device, connected to Intune, and now they're going through and wiping those devices, that's not good. Also, obviously the corporate side's not good either, and that's a lot of endpoints. So and I mentioned this happened in early March. So on March 11th, 12th, and 23rd, Stryker did some SEC 8K filings. And 8K filings are specific ones that can include things like cyber incident details. And by April 1st, they claimed they were fully back up and operational, so 3 weeks post-attack. But you know that the fallout kind of lingers and investigations continue. Um, so this is, not a great deal for Stryker. So in the wake of this, Microsoft published guidance 3 days after the breach, and CISA was out there urging organizations to adopt these best practices for securing Microsoft Intune. So I want to talk about those 5 best practices for Intune to make sure to mitigate this type of risk. So first off, um, admin least privileged and scoped role-based access control. So you want to make sure you limit who has global admin in those highly privileged admin roles. If you're a global admin, don't use those roles for daily admin tasks in Intune. Rather, only elevate when you need it. And then using scope tags to say, okay, well, this admin can only manage this subset of devices. Maybe it's a region or a business unit. So using scope tags so that if an admin account is compromised, you might just lose a region, not the whole enterprise. Adopting time-bound elevation for admin roles using a privileged management solution. So this is the concept of you're not always admin and you check out admin rights when you need it. Excuse me. And then making sure you require reauthentication on elevation sensitive operations. Number 2, implementing phishing resistant authentication. So this is something where you're using maybe synced pass keys or a FIDO2 security keys or smart card type of thing, or like a YubiKey, something like that, where you're getting rid of SMS, text message, 6-digit codes, these one-time passcodes, push notifications. Because a lot of times, we see with MFA fatigue, people get a bunch of push notifications. They just hit approve to stop the push notifications coming through, and that lets the bad actor in. And this diagram is showing the adversary in the middle intercepting, credentials and submitting them to the identity provider, but then getting the end user to actually approve the MFA, thinking that they're logging into the thing that they want. Oops. For example, pass keys are a great option, being URL specific, device specific, user specific. So you have to be able to compromise all of that to make the man in the middle attack. If you want to roll out phishing resistant authentication, there are some great conditional access policies in Intra. So if you go into the conditional access section, they have these policy templates. I highly recommend looking at those. There's a lot of great templates. Um, this option here. If you go to create that, you'll see that you have this one option for maybe I can zoom in here. Require phishing resistant multi-factor authentication for admins. So this would actually put that in place for you. Now, if you dig into this conditional access policy, what this is actually doing is you have this grant option, which you basically say grant access, but requiring strong authentication. And if you pull down that box, you will see it provides an option for phishing resistant MFA. And so that's really what we want to see, is that option there. So that's what it looks like on the configuration side. But you should also have conditional access policies that require compliant devices for, Intune, that challenge high-risk users or high-risk sign-ins, that restrict access by location. And then if you have admins, making sure that you have higher security baselines on those admin workstations, that you don't use these things for everyday use, that you're kind of isolating, okay, admins use this system just for these purposes. Everything else is on kind of their daily driver accounts and daily driver system. Okay, moving on to number three, multi-admin approval for sensitive Intune changes. So if you've logged into Intune recently, you might have seen this pop up here saying, hey, we recommend multi-admin approval. And what that is that's requiring a second authorized admin to review certain changes and do a kind of separation of duties. You got to have two people turning the key to allow the missile launch type of scenario. So what that looks like is you're in here in multi-admin approval. That's this option in your Intune configuration blade. And then if you drill down into it, there are options for the multi-admin approval where you can say, okay, I want multi-admin for device wipe, or changes to configuration policies, changes to compliance policies, or maybe the changes to the tenant configuration. There's a lot of options here. And so recommend put in the options that make sense for you. But certainly, if you had it for device wipe and somebody tried to wipe all of your devices at once, it wouldn't work without another admin approving that. So that's a much higher bar for the attackers to reach. The number four best practice is cloud control plane monitoring and response. So monitoring for those sensitive actions, forwarding those logs to a SIM, creating incident response playbooks for responding to data wipe threats, doing a tabletop exercise for a wipe all drill is what would we do if all of our endpoints were all of a sudden beginning to be wiped? I think that's a good exercise to go through. And then having emergency access break glass accounts. So to prevent lockout, like if somebody does get admin, what they could do is block out all the other admins. So you want to make sure you've got a break glass account that you use with phishing resistant MFA, so like a YubiKey, one of these NFC or USB keys, and you have it as a on Microsoft.com domain account so that they have no privileges, they don't have licenses assigned to them and things like that, but they do have global admin privilege. And when they use these accounts, you need to make sure you configure alerts so all admins get alerted when these small set of accounts get used. And so you could like lock this in a safe or put it somewhere where if you need it, you've got it, but it's rarely, if ever, used. Okay, so let's go on to the next breach scenario. We have PowerSchool, which is our third-party blast radius breach. So PowerSchool, if you're not in the K through 12 space, or you don't have kids who go to a K through 12 that uses PowerSchool, you might not know what it is. So they are a big cloud-based education technology company headquartered in California. They have a student information system used by more than 18,000 organizations across 90 countries, serving the records of over 60 million students in the US and Canada. So it's typically like used on the back end to manage things like enrollment records, health alerts, um, but it has, because it's in the enrollment process and student records business, they have sensitive information like social security numbers, medical history, etc. And if you're a student or a parent that's going to a school that uses a PowerSchool or some other platform, you can't really opt out of it. You've got to use it. And so this was a big incident that affected a lot of individuals. So in kind of mid to late 24, there was a hacker that used credentials of a PowerSchool technical support contractor to access PowerSource. PowerSource is actually the back end kind of what PowerSchool engineers use to do remote support of PowerSchool instances, to do support and troubleshooting. So it's really, for PowerSchool employees, those engineering employees to use, and so it was not widely used, but a hacker was able to get credentials to that. And even though PowerSchool had MFA on it, PowerSource did not. And they initially accessed data for one school district, but then across December, they leased a server in Ukraine to download student and teacher databases for thousands of districts. And so this was not a traditional software exploit, 0 day. Instead, identity compromise again, privileged support access, bulk export capability. I mean, these are things that are could be common in ERP systems that are cloud hosted. So December 28th, PowerSchool gets a ransom demand. And in January, PowerSchool paid $2.85 million in ransom. And the ransomware actors showed a video showing them doing secure deletion of data. And the threat actor said, hey, we promise we're not going to publish your data. We're just going to securely delete it. Well, so they notified institutions of the cyber attack. But then in May, a bad actor that had access to that data didn't actually delete it, had a copy of that data, started ransoming each of the school districts. So the impacts here are 62 million students affected, 9.5 million teachers, thousands of school districts, a lot of sensitive data. And unfortunately, schools like K through 12 are an attractive target because the student's PII is often they got clean credit reports, often unused and unmonitored. So those identities, unfortunately, are oftentimes more valuable. And so, if you've got somebody a minor, make sure you do monitoring of their credit report, even if they have no reason to have a credit report. So they caught the hacker that carried this out. And this is a picture here of Matthew Lane. So he was actually 19 years old, and he was a freshman at Assumption University when he carried out the attack on PowerSchool. So he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, ordered to pay more than $14 million in restitution. Federal officials accused him of carrying out at least 8 cyber attacks dating back to at least 2021 when he was still in high school. So, obviously not good. What happened, interestingly, in Canada is Ontario and Alberta have privacy commissioners and strict kind of privacy policies, and they opened an investigation of PowerSchool, and then they published their findings, which was fantastic for public disclosure, learning about what to do. So the key thing here is not all organizations that were on PowerSchool were breached. There was a remote support configuration option in there. By default, it was turned off, which meant Empower Source, which is that engineering background or back-end system, by default, they can't get into your PowerSchool instance. Well, if you need remote support, you would turn that on temporarily, but a lot of people actually turned it always on just to make it easier for support to get in. So it was just the organizations that had it turned on, whether it was always on or temporarily within the time of the attack, that were actually affected by this compromise. So if you've got a SaaS solution, look at your configurations to see, do I have an option to limit the vendor's access into this data for support and troubleshooting purposes? And you should have that off and only turned on when needed, and have that access monitored where possible. So that was an interesting lesson learned. Actually, in as of today, Power School has removed the always on option. So if you're on Power School, you will see you just have off and on temporarily at this point, because they that was a big finding. Then those audits then went into the lack of third-party risk management practice that these schools had over PowerSchool. They lacked provisions within the contract. They lacked oversight measures to make sure PowerSchool was doing what they should have done. They over these K through 12 organizations over collected sensitive personal data. Like a lot of entities had data going back to the mid 1980s, which they clearly didn't need anymore. Um, and they lacked proper response plans and protocols. So the recommendations that came out of these audits are, limiting the vendor's remote access, developing incident response plan that takes this stuff into account, establishing vendor risk management programs, insisting on reviewing copies of the, PowerSchool or whoever your vendor is, their certifications, their SOC 2, their attestations of security, and then enhancing vendor contracts to protect your rights as a consumer of their services, and making sure you have the notifications in a timely manner, and that you've got a right to audit in some cases. Um, PowerSchool failures. They didn't have MFA supported for PowerSource. They the intrusion was undetected for 4 months, despite them saying, well, we have 24/7 robust monitoring. It didn't help in this case. And then log data retention, in fact, didn't go back 5 months. And you should really be keeping log data for at least 12 months. So when they were going to investigate this, they didn't have the initial attack vector in the logs because they didn't retain logs that long, which is not good. Okay. So that's a Power School breach. Thought that was really interesting and kind of a situation that shows how, we need to have some control and some oversight and risk management of our vendors, especially these key vendors like Power School was to these organizations. So let's now talk about Anthropic. They had a code leak recently, which was really interesting. No, not a full breach of their environment, but they leaked a lot of private source code, proprietary source code. And this was in end of March of this year. About 500,000 lines of proprietary source code were leaked for Claude Code. And it wasn't a hack, but it was preventable operational failure. So they publish, Claude Code so people can run it and do things with it um, as an NPM package. And it comes with a .map file. And the .map file helps. It's a JSON file that kind of I don't want to get too technical here, but it maps transform code into production ready code so that when developers are debugging, they can know, okay, what lines of source code does this relate to, even though this thing has been like transformed into a minified version of the code. So anyway, this map file is not supposed to be made public, but it was accidentally made public because it wasn't included in the npm ignore file, which says, hey, don't publish these files. It was left out of there, so the map file was published, and it pointed to a publicly accessible Cloudflare R2 storage bucket containing the full unobfuscated source code of Claude Code. So researchers shared that issue on Twitter, X. Within hours, that code was forked more than 41,000 times. And if you went to go download one of these forks, chances are it was going to be laced with malware because a lot of these forks were malicious. So that was kind of interesting as well. But like I said, 500,000 lines of code, 1,900 files, hidden features were revealed that talked about their product roadmap. Actually, a lot of stuff that came out with Claude Mythos was in there. Um, no customer data or model weights were exposed, but this was, external APIs, permission enforcement logic, sandboxing architecture. So if you're an attacker wanting to target, the sandbox and other aspects of this is a huge, piece of information, very valuable for attackers. So if you are, in a software development realm for, software development pipelines, consider using, configuration management tools to make sure you don't have unauthorized changes of key files like this npm ignore file. Do package size anomaly detection to see, okay, are we all of a sudden exposing way more data in our packages that we maybe that'll indicate something's there that shouldn't be there. Making sure if you have public storage buckets, making sure those are set to least privilege and you block public buckets where possible. Doing a routine audit of your buckets is key. Okay. So on to our last case, living off the land with Scattered Spider. So Scattered Spider is a threat actor group who they are financially motivated, native English speaking criminal organization, active since at least 2022. They rely heavily on social engineering rather than, 0 days or software exploitation. They focus on large enterprises and they specifically target IT help desk and end users pretending to be IT help desk. So they are also known as Muddled Libra and UNC 3944 and a variety of other names. But they are generally young. They're young individuals, highly adept at using various social engineering tactics. They impersonate employees to attempt MFA reset. So one example would be they would call into the help desk to pretend to be a user who's lost access to their MFA device. And so getting help desk to then reset MFA, essentially allowing them to bypass multi-factor or reset their password, things like that to get in. A second example would be they call an employee directly, like a victim directly, claiming to be from the help desk, saying, "Hey, I need your help." Either launching or downloading remote management software and then proceeding with the attack from that one system. They are linked to a variety of big, kind of high profile attacks targeting various organizations. Um, they use minimal use of malware and use the victim's own assets and living off the land is what we call it. So, living off of using legit system admin tools that might be there or they might bring in, and they're fast acting. So on average, organizations are at about 33 hours from, you know, I from a bad actor getting in to it being contained. Problem is Scattered Spider is getting access to their domain admin credentials within 40 minutes in some cases. And so they are very fast. So if you're hit by them, a quick response is going to be needed, but be very challenging. So if you're using intra ID, implementing conditional access policies, you do that. The best, like the guidance around dealing with threat actors like these is you got to slow them down. The speed is what is so challenging because if you can slow them down, potentially you can limit the impact. Maybe it's just a device or a region that's impacted and not your whole enterprise. And so doing things to slow them down is key. So preventing unmanaged devices from accessing sensitive resources, enforcing, employees to be on-prem to set up MFA, blocking certain countries, geolocations, that's not a silver bullet, but it's a helpful control, requiring MFA to access certain resources like VDI, training your IT support staff, your help desk to identify phishing attempts and to being very vigilant to make sure they don't just blindly trust individuals, that they challenge these individuals with things that are not known publicly that would give them more confidence, or calling back the user on a known good number so that you make sure you're talking to the right person. Getting these rigorous procedures for validating identities is going to be very important. Um, Ensuring AD password reset policies are not allowing password resets outside of normal business hours, blocking network traffic to file sharing sites, and unimproved remote management monitoring. So RMM tools, Scattered Spider uses a plethora of RMM tools. Things like Screen Connect, TeamViewer, Splashtop. These are legit um, remote management monitoring tools that IT support staff use. And whatever you use in your environment, you should identify it and make it the standard and then block everything else. So, if you're a Screen Connect shop, make sure you're blocking all of the other ones that you. And one way to do that is this LOL RMM website. I highly recommend that. It is a curated list of RMM tools and that can potentially be abused by threat actors. And that if you go to that site, basically it will list, okay, for every RMM tool, it will say, here are the installation paths, here are the capabilities, here are the disk artifacts, here are the event log artifacts, here's the registry artifacts, network artifacts, like DNS records that it has to reach. And so maybe you could block those DNS records, maybe you could block those specific executables based on their hash. Maybe you can block specific installation paths. Make sure you're blocking all the RMMs that you don't use. That's a key recommendation for handling this type of threat. Segmenting and restricting access to your virtual resources, because that's what they're going to go after. They're going to go after your VMware vCenter, your ESXi hosts, and attempt to encrypt servers, take over servers, things like that. And again, evaluating your service providers is still going to be very key with this because they can come in from your service providers. Make sure your cloud logging is retaining data for at least 180 days, preferably a year. Log all help desk call center calls and activities to be able to identify suspicious calls. You might not need to actually log the verbal exchange, but logging the caller ID, the duration of the call, things like that at the minimum. If you can actually log the calls themselves, that'd be great. Detecting changes to your IAM infrastructure, like newly connected devices, is very important. Establishing out of band communication in case the threat actor has access to your Teams or Slack environment, whatever you use to do internal communication. If you're doing your IR team communication over a Teams or Slack channel that the bad actor is watching or monitoring, that's again not very good. So having an out of band method, having cell phone numbers of your team so you can get on a conference call or something like that. Additional tips for hardening, against the land, living off the land type of threats. Locking down PowerShell. There was a survey that showed that 49% of threats used PowerShell in the attack chain, while the Windows Command Shell was just 38%. So a lot of the bad actors are using PowerShell to automate, to do their bad actions. Make sure you disable old PowerShell. Like 2.0, it's deprecated, it's got vulnerabilities, it's weak, it doesn't do logging and security like the latest and greatest PowerShell does. Not entirely sure if PowerShell 7 is the latest and greatest, but whatever that is, make sure you're using that. You can disable 2.0 using this command. You can block PS remoting, do that where possible. So what that does is you can't run PowerShell on one command that will execute, on one system that will execute on another system. And so you can do that through this, or you can literally just block these TCP ports at the host-based firewall so that PS remoting is not an option. Because that's what a bad actor would do. They'll use a PowerShell to try to gather information across your enterprise, and being able to do remote PS remoting speeds that up extremely effectively. Make sure you enable PowerShell logging. So go into your group policy settings. This turn on module logging is very important to turn on in your group policy settings. It'll ask you for certain module names. Just use the wildcard symbol, the asterisk, to turn on for all modules. If possible, only allow digitally signed PowerShell scripts. You can do that in this option here. That will slow you down if, as an IT admin, you write and use your own PowerShell scripts. You'll just have to sign them with your own certificate authority. But again, that will make sure untrusted PowerShell isn't executed in your environment, which would be a huge, huge win. There are a lot of other recommendations for hardening PowerShell. It's a free resource out there, the Center for Internet Security. They have this Living Off the Land Attacks PowerShell guidance document that could be very useful to your team. I recommend taking a look at that. So we've talked about a lot of controls, and if you just want to screenshot one thing, this is a this is a slide that just captures everything we've talked about, but I am a big proponent of mental models. I got to think about, okay, how do these fit into like the cybersecurity program? So like if I look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, for instance, and I want to take all of these and organize them in that fashion, this is one way to do that. Looking at this vendor risk management and govern. This is just that same checklist, just reorganized into govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And so thinking about, if you're going to implement these, if you're going to implement protections, make sure you're not just focusing on one column here. Make sure you are, you know, spending some time in govern, spending some time in respond, recover, not just doing protect, detect. Make sure you're handling all these columns. So I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for attending this webinar. We intend to do more of these on a quarterly basis. So really appreciate your attendance. And lastly, I'll leave my contact info here. But think about how can we help you? When you're struggling with your cybersecurity plan or strategy, give us a call. Not only do we conduct assessments like penetration tests, risk assessments, vuln management services, but we also provide expert cybersecurity guidance so that you've got somebody on your side who can give you that best guidance on how to approach your specific security posture, your specific requirements, and the challenges you're facing right now. So I welcome you to reach out to me and to our team to start that conversation. But thank you again for attending this webinar, and I really appreciate you being on the call today. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.